And welcome back in for another Wednesday edition of RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. I'll go this way. He's Kurt Helin from NBC Sports and Basketball Talk. And you can see on the bottom there by his name for those viewing us on YouTube where you can reach him on Twitter. As always, you can reach us on our chat board. And, if they're not too profane, we will go over those as well. Want to lead in with this, Kurt, because Big O was talking about it on our crosstalk, and you can catch the rest of his podcast at all your podcast outlets, is I think the reason the talk has gotten so slow, and I spoke to a friend who works at ESPN, and they basically tell me they clear the deck when it comes to the NFL. And a lot of their guys are taking vacations or slow down. They don't need Woj bombs now. They have their NFL bombs. The season starts tonight. If you happen to get, I think it's Prime on Amazon or whatever. They're carrying the games now. So I don't think necessarily, Kurt, things slow. I know you like to get your reports out there. I know you do a great job of anything that's out there. You aggregate for the people, you put together, add your own spin. Do you think necessarily, Kurt, the league has slowed, or do you think the reporting of the league has slowed?
A little of both, but I think also just the league is slow. This summer dragged out with Mitchell, with Durant, with all the stuff we've been talking about for weeks. With Mitchell off the board, now it's there. Look again, and we'll talk about it in a second. There's Montrell Harrell, there's the Jazz talking to some people, but the NBA has slowed down for just they're getting ready for camps, right? Right now, everybody's healthy. Everybody's optimistic. Well, most everybody's healthy. Everybody's optimistic. Everybody loves their team right now, right? Like this is the time of year when you're like, no, this is going to work. It's, hey, Patrick Beverley and Russell Westbrook are going to play together. What could possibly go wrong? Like it's like every team is there right now. Every team is happy and it's singing Kumbaya, and that will start to change when training camps open and adversity starts to strike and there are injuries and reports start coming out. But right now, you said, nobody's really pushing on, I don't think is hard. I don't want to say pushing, but like nobody's digging. But there's also just not much to dig up right now. Teams are, guys, this is like you said, this is also the unofficial. Everybody comes back and starts working out at team facilities. Ira, we should be ready for the reports about player X gained 15 pounds of muscle and looks great, or dropped 50. Like it's that time of year.
Yeah. Rarely you get those. Came back exceedingly fat, and insiders on the team are extremely worried. Want to go over a couple of moves. First of all, since we did our show last week on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint was the Donovan Mitchell trade, and I will get to that in a second here in our first segment. Want to sort of talk about the quote, if you want to call it news of the day, Montrell Harrell signing that 2-year deal with the Philadelphia 76ers. So all of a sudden, a team that lacked any degree of toughness in last season's playoffs. The Heat showed that. They've now added P.J. Tucker. They've added Montrell Harrell. They've added more defensive deterrence. Your thoughts on Philadelphia adding Harrell? You saw him out there with a couple of LA teams, what he's done in his career. Then he went ahead, won Sixth Man of the Year award last season in Washington and then Charlotte. Your thought on Philadelphia sort of getting guys who can kick sand in your face that maybe they missed last season?
I think that Harrell brings some of that, right? Like that fiery attitude. He's unlike the other guys they picked up, the Anthony Melton and PJ Tucker, and Daniel Hauser, who are guys they can trust, I think, in the postseason. Montrell Harrell is, to use the baseball term, he's an innings eater, right? Like, yes, he's going to give them 20 minutes a night of hard play at the 5, so you can, look, if you're the 76ers, what is goal number 1, goal number 2, and goal number 3? Keep Joel Embiid healthy. Right? Like you've got to keep his minutes down. Harrell helps with that. He's a good pick, whether they're running Harden or Tyrese Maxey with the second unit. He sets a good pick, rolls hard. When he won Sixth Man of the Year, he and Lou Williams were a dynamic pairing with the Clippers second unit, and they could score enough to keep them in games or even expand leads. I think that's what they're hoping for out of him. If their second unit can hold its own, they like their first unit's chances, and we'll see. I think it's a good signing for the regular season. I don't think it moves the needle. Like all our playoff questions, Ira, still sit there with them.
Sure,
but I like that signing for the regular season. It just isn't the goal to keep everybody healthy and have some depth, and that they got it.
And you know what? There might be two parts to that also, Kurt, because for down here, the local feeling, losing PJ Tucker, it also buys innings for PJ Tucker. That here's a guy at 37, 38 years old that you don't have to play him maybe as much as the Heat did last year when the Heat didn't have a true backup power forward. So he also, like you said, I think come the playoffs, you can strategize against him. Guy has no offensive game except as a role guy. You can get him caught out there in switches. It doesn't work as much. The goal for Philadelphia, as much as keeping Embiid fresh during the regular season and maybe PJ Tucker, is getting past the conference semifinals, which they have not done, and they have struggled in the Embiid era. So I see that also. So I see it's a nice signing. Let me go back another direction. Now, we've sort of filled people in here in redrecover.com inside the paint in recent weeks. The Heat does not want to add another player now because they don't want to be hard capped. The only way the Heat could have added Harrell was either with the rest of their mid-level exception, the part they didn't give to Caleb Martin. Once you go above the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, hard capped. That's why they didn't do that. Or they could have given him similar to what Philadelphia did, the biannual exception, about $4 million a year. Once you use that exception, hard capped. Can you give me an argument with the Heat having an open roster spot, with the Heat having let go of PJ Tucker because they didn't want to be hard capped, the Heat going ahead and having signed Montrell Harrell, knowing that part of history? Because I know there's a lot of people here in Heat Nation are wondering, why did they let him get away?
Yeah, if you could have signed him for the minimum or something, that would have been one thing. But once you were talking, and he's probably slightly better than a minimum player.
Right.
Once you're into that, you said, now once you're hard capped, I don't think people understand how much that really limits you down the line. And I think if you're the Heat and you're looking, I mean, or you would say this, the reason for that open roster spot is flexibility, is to decide down the line, all right, hey, this is, our need is here. You know, maybe it ends up being power forward, but maybe it ends up being somewhere else due to injury or guys just not playing at the level they expect or whatever happens. This gives them, right now they have flexibility. The second they bring in someone like Harrell at a price that's going to hard cap them, that you don't have the roster spot, and your flexibility to make a move really goes away. You save that bullet, for lack of a better phrasing on that, like for a bigger move than, hey, this guy can eat some innings.
And I agree with that. And as I wrote in my Ask Ira at sunsentinel.com, you can't on one hand say you didn't bring PJ Tucker back because you don't want to be hard capped, and then bring back a lesser replacement for him and wind up being hard capped. So I think the Heat, the one thing you want to do with the start of free agency is get your ducks in order and say, if this, then that. This is going to be our approach, and we're going to stay with the approach until there's the guy. Whether the guy had been Kevin Durant, nope, not anymore. Whether the guy had been Donovan Mitchell, no, not anymore. But like Big O led in our crosstalk, you still have the John Collins situation in Atlanta with that workout with Trae Young and now DeJounte Murray. You still have, I still don't think the Sacramento Kings have any chance in the loaded West of making the playoffs, quote unquote, top 6, maybe play in top 10. But the Harrison Barnes contract out there, do they still move to the future? He's a guy who could be out there. Indiana is, matter of fact, I'll put this to you really quickly before I get back into Miles Turner. There's no chance in hell that Indiana is making the playoffs, quote, top 6. So if we have those top 6 teams, and again, I'm just spitballing here, no order, as the Heat, the 76ers, the Bucks, the Celtics, the Nets, I'm going to say the Raptors, but we can argue that another time. Is
Cleveland
there
would
any
like to be in
chance
that
the Pacers
conversation.
even make the top 10 to get into the play-in, considering we haven't mentioned Chicago, we haven't mentioned the Knicks, we haven't mentioned Washington bringing back Beal? Does Indiana even have any outlook of saying, hey, we could still be a play-in team this year?
No, I mean, no. And I don't think they want to. They're not going to. They've never been an organization that's going to go full tank, right? Like, that's just not how that's just not the organization style.
Until now, I agree.
Right. But I think that they have to realize, and I think they do, and I think their front office, maybe more than ownership, we'll see. But I agree. I think that what they're waiting for are the right deals. They want first-round picks for Turner. They want things that get them there for Turner and Beal, who are both look, Big O. They're available.
Yes.
Like Barnes, less so. Sacramento, Ira, you and I are on the same page there, but the delusion in Sacramento is that they are going to make the playoffs this year. They are desperate to end their 16-year.
Right. That's the September optimism.
And that's an ownership level decision. That is not coming from anywhere short of, I don't like owning a team that has missed the playoffs for 6. You know how hard it is to miss the playoffs for 16 straight years in the NBA, where more than half the teams make it. Like it's an impressive streak in a bad way. So yeah, they're going to have to be really bad before they're going to buy before they sell. Let's put it that way.
Well, but let me ask you this: Miles Turner's in the final year of a contract.
Yeah.
You have the decision, quote unquote, to make. Do you think Indiana's looking at their roster now and saying, okay, we have Halliburton, we've had some nice young draft choices. Yeah. Do you think Indiana, let's just put it on the table right here, Kurt. Do you think Indiana is more likely to A, move off of Miles Turner and get some young players and assets, or 2, say, you know what, we're going to re-up this guy for another 5 years? Which way do you think they go with Miles Turner?
They trade him. I'm a little surprised they haven't traded him and Beal already, but there's a good chance they're gone before the season starts. There is, never say never, but a less than 1% chance they're on the team past the trade deadline. By the way, if you're going to tank, and if you're going in the tank this year, you need to do what Utah just did. If you're going to tank, right, you don't keep Miles Turner and Buddy Hield around. Those guys win games. Like, those guys can play. It doesn't help.
They're going to get in the way, right? They're going to get in the way of really bad things, and we want some really bad things. Now, I know this next subject is going to take us through our first break here on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. But again, you patch together all of the podcasts. You can hear all the segments together. So last Wednesday, you and I were talking about, okay, Kevin Durant is done. The Nets are who they are. It's gotten very quiet there in Brooklyn. Apparently, with Royce O'Neal and the move they made, they feel comfortable enough. And then, boom, Thursday it happens. And it happens in a way none of us, well, I don't want to say that. Again, I read most of your stuff. I'm going to be honest. I don't read all of it. Maybe you mentioned this. But boom, all of a sudden, Cleveland Cavaliers are the team for Donovan Mitchell, which changes the outlook in the East to a degree. But I first want to bring it back to the Heat. Again, we don't know for sure what or if the Heat offer was, but we're going to work off the presumption of something along the lines of a Tyler Hero, a Duncan Robinson cap filler, and I would feel confident in some form, although I don't know if totally unprotected, a pair of Heat first-round picks. Then we saw what Cleveland offered, where Lauri Markkanen might be moved somewhere else. He's the cap filler there. You get a nice young player in Colin Sexton, and you get a boatload of picks. So when people were saying, hey, Ira, how did their sort of package trump the Heat's? I sort of lined up the players, and I'm saying, okay, your cap filler guys, Lauri Markkanen, Duncan Robinson. Okay. Your young prospect guys, Colin Sexton, Tyler Hero. I'm going to sort of interrupt myself as here we go and do this piecemeal. Better player, Tyler Hero, Colin Sexton, in your view, Kurt Helin?
I'd rather have Tyler Hero. Colin Sexton has put up numbers, but done it in a way that just pissed off his teammates, frankly. He was, we'll see, maybe his game has evolved over the last year, but he was so ball dominant would overstate it. He's the guy on the YMCA team that you hate because he never passes. Yeah,
he reminds me of what Kevin Porter Jr. has done with Houston. Yeah. Now, on a bad team, you can get your numbers, but what does that translate into? But I want to go to part B of that. So some Heat fans might have said, well, wait a minute, it's just cap filler, Duncan Robinson and Markkanen. It's just young player. Here's the difference. Cost certainty. When the Jazz received Colin Sexton in the trade, I think it was his contract topped out at about, with incentives, about $74 million. Tyler Hero's contract, we think if he's extended here next summer, restricted free agency, probably closer to that $120 million figure, or at least the Jalen Brunson 105. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So he is over 100. Yeah. Easy.
Okay. So I'm going to rephrase the previous question I asked you. Colin Sexton at $74 million plus it locked in, or Tyler Hero at, let's go $110 million because it's not my money, or Tyler Hero getting a contract somewhere for 110, which is the better value of those two now that we can put a number with Sexton?
I would say Colin, and especially, I'm going to put some context on this.
Okay.
In particular for Utah, because look, they're not done trading, right? Mike Conley will be gone. Bogdanovich will be gone. Jordan Clarkson will be gone. Somebody's got to have the ball in their hands and score points. And this is what Sexton can do for them at a tradable price down the line if he ups his value, which is we said before, he frustrated teammates how much he had the ball in his hands and didn't give it up. And that's what they're going to do.
Yes.
Hey, Colin, here's the ball. Go nuts. Go get us points. Keep us, in games and around and entertaining. Up your trade value, by the way. Maybe we'll do something with that down the line.
Flip him again now that he's cost certainty.
Exactly.
Right.
but that's the plan. It is not, in that sense, he's a better fit. He's a better shot creator than Tyler Hero is a better player, but he's not a primary shot creator in quite the same way that I think Colin Sexton is. So I think in terms of fit, this is a better fit.
Colin Sexton helps you lose 115, 104. I think he's that kind of player. He'll get you to the 104. He's not going to get you to the W. Then we have part 3 of the trade, and I went out, and this is where I nixed the trade from a Heat perspective. Not that they might have been able to cobble this together anyway, but I called the price tag absurd. I know some Heat fans came back down hard on me, and that's fine. That's why I do Ask Ira at sunsentinel.com every single freaking day, even in the summer. But 3 unprotected first-round picks, well enough off in the future, including 27 and 29. I mean, hell, that's 5 and 7 years from now, and 3 pick swaps. Pick swaps are different. Pick swaps mean that Utah has to have a better record than Cleveland to appreciate any value there of getting the better draft choice. Still, Kurt, when you look at a package of equivalencies, the Heat would have put in Robinson, the Cavs put in Markkanen. The Heat would have put in Hero, the Cavs put in Sexton. But to me, the killer was when you saw the trade and it came out, and you were expecting the Knicks to give up 92 picks because the Knicks, 1, they're desperate, 2, they're stupid. Is that to you a line where you said, whoa, or not? Or did you say, hey, this is the new Rudy Gobert reality when it comes to draft picks? This is what you do? Because I thought that was insane. I thought when the Nets did it for Garnett and Pierce, their thought was, hey, we're going to go ahead and just throw it all to the wind. We're moving to Brooklyn. No one's a Nets fan. Everyone's going to Madison Square Garden. We have to make a splash. When those kind of trades were made for James Harden going from the Rockets to the Nets, again, somewhat Nets desperation, they wanted a big 3. And even the Sixers, when they sent those picks to the Nets for Harden, they were on the precipice of contending as an NBA champion. And it's James Harden. I don't like his game at all, but that's a player who can lead the NBA in scoring perennially. When you saw the draft loot that was offered by Cleveland to the Utah Jazz, what did you think of the overall scope of package? Winderman called it absurd.
I thought it was a little high and a little desperate. I'll also say this. Cleveland, it was an more acceptable risk because they're not getting a superstar. They are not Miami. They are not New York or Los Angeles. They can't just, man, we didn't get this guy. We can just move on to the next one. They're not that city. They're not that franchise, right? Like they are people not coming there. If Donovan Mitchell's on 3 years, right? Like he's got that 3-year deal. We've got 2 of those years now to convince him to stay, to win enough games, to show him how great pierogies are, or whatever it's going to take to win. They can convince him to stay and then go from there, because look, that is a nice young core now. I can poke holes in it. I can say they're not contenders or as good as the Heat, and maybe they will be in a few years with Mobley and stuff. A different discussion, but they're not going to get somebody like this. It is worth the risk for them in a way I'm not sure it is for other organizations. I'll ask you this though, Ira, because those picks, the problem, we discussed this before with Miami, those picks aren't going to be great.
No, they're worthless. They're in the 20s. Good, right? Even in the worst years, they're in the mid-teens if they get out of the lottery. So I agree with that. I want to stay on the Donovan Mitchell sort of trade path here in our redrecover.com Inside the Paint show after our break. And I want to get your thoughts on a few things. Number one, I want to get your thoughts on, does this vault Cleveland how high in the East? Possibly a threat to the Miami Heat. Number two, and I think you might have written this at Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com. The Knicks are a freaking joke, or maybe that was someone else who wrote that. So I want to get your reactions on what this does to the Knicks. And number three, I want to talk about the ancillary players you mentioned, Jordan Clarkson, Bogdanovich, and Conley, in regards to the trade market and maybe even in regards to the Heat having interest in any of those three. So sort of part two of our Donovan Mitchell discussion next after this break on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. He's Kurt Helin from Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com. Back for our second segment here on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. If you missed the first segment, we spoke about the Heat possibly losing out on Montrell Harrell, how that can impact the Heat in the East. You can hear that on our podcast. I want to continue with something we spoke about in our first segment. Again, you can pick up on that. The Donovan Mitchell trade, sort of even though it came from a West Coast team, what Utah got back is not going to change the West for years to come, but it does impact the East. So I want to first start with when you look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, who were the surprise story of last season, who until really the latter stages were not even a play-in team, but a playoff team. Got a few injuries. It changed their dynamic a little. It changed their projection a little. Kurt, when you look now at one of the more intriguing, if not undersized backcourts in the NBA with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, you look at the front court now, they're not 3 7-footers anymore, but they add in an Isaac Okoro, I think. I don't know what direction specifically they're going to go in as a defensive element. You have Mobley, who might be the best player from last year's draft, ultimately in the long run, when you look at what he's done so far. And Jarrett Allen and sort of that whole, speaking of the Harden trade with the Nets we spoke about a couple of years ago in our first segment, how he was almost a throwaway player there, where the Nets said, hey, we got Nick Claxton, we don't need a center, and he emerged into an all-star. So when we look at the East hierarchy, and again, in our first segment, I said, I think I'm moving Brooklyn in. I know Big O has disagreed. He wants to wait and see. You have said that a little bit after the Durant thing also. We initially had a top 4 in the East projection-wise, some order of Boston, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Miami. I am adding in Brooklyn now with Kyrie and with Durant. My number 6 team for the make the playoffs above the play-in line is Toronto. I think people still sleep on that lineup and what they have there with the emergence of Barnes and Van Vliet and OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam in their lineup. Kurt, this Cleveland team, long-winded way to get to you. Sorry you couldn't talk in the first minute of the segment. Where would you put this Cleveland team in the East hierarchy? And be honest here, because you're all the way out in L.A. No one's going to come attack you. Are they a threat to the Heat?
Not if the Heat are healthy. I still think the Heat are just a better team. I actually would say that, first off, I'm with you, especially in the regular season. I've got my questions about Brooklyn, but you got Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. You're just going to win a lot of games, man. You're going to be fine.
They just have to show up. That's a simple show-up team. That if you're playing one of these daily fantasy pools or just betting daily, if Durant shows up and Irving shows up, they're a favorite against most, probably any team at home, and most teams even on the road. So it's simply a matter of, well, you know, the injury reports, they now come out hourly on the half hour, you know, and teams have to have them in by 3:30. But if they don't show up in those injury reports, that's a good regular season team.
Right, exactly. So I'm with you. I think there's a clear top 5. I move Cleveland into kind of a tie with Toronto. I will pick Toronto just because, I think I've talked about this before. I think they're really tough in the regular season because they don't play like anybody else. They're not built like anybody else. They are unpredictable. I think there are holes at the 3. Isaac Okoro, you're right, gets a chance, but they have a really dynamic scoring backcourt and a really elite front court and a lot to figure out unless you're expecting a Kevin Love resurgence. There's still a lot to figure out in Cleveland. But I think that top 5, especially Miami, but I think, frankly, I think this applies to all of them. They're all where Toronto and Cleveland are is if there's an injury or something else changes the dynamic there where one of the key players misses time and that team steps back, there's not some huge gap now. There's not a top 5 and then it drops off the cliff. I think Toronto and Cleveland are 6-7 and really close to those teams. So the threat is a non-healthy Heat team. There's not some cushion like, oh, we got room. We can drop a few games. There's just the East isn't going to be that way. You struggle for 2 weeks and you're going to drop from 3rd to 7th really quick.
And the Heat were there at some points last year. When you go back to Basketball Reference and the day-by-day standings, they had their time. So what I'm curious about is if we have you putting Toronto finishing the Big 6, I guess now we call it, for teams that don't have to go to the play-in. So you have those. You're putting Cleveland, I guess, maybe at 7. What about the Chicago Bulls? We found out last week that Lonzo Ball, I mean, this injury's gone on forever, is going to miss the start of the season. ESPN reported that. My friend Casey Johnson reported that for NBC Sports out of Chicago. But that team, when they were rolling, and they had it going early last season, they spent a long time in first place last season with what they had. I don't think DeMar DeRozan can ever be as good as his age as he was last season when he was frankly great. But what they had going on there, and that was Patrick Williams injured almost the entire season until he came back late in the year. Vucevic had a terrible season by his standards. I think he could turn it around. Why, in your view, is Cleveland decidedly ahead of Chicago, or are we sleeping on Chicago?
I'm not as high on Chicago just because I don't think they defend terribly well consistently. And again, missing Patrick for the whole season really kind of threw that into a mix. And this is where missing Ball. Remember, Alex Caruso missed a chunk of the season for them last year.
And those guys at some point will be back and they'll be closer to whole.
Yeah, and that's a team with, I think, another team with like no margin for error. Like when everybody's right and they're healthy, again, I think you can pick on some of these spots in the playoffs, but in the regular season, I mean, they were a top handful seed for much of the season, right? Like,
yes.
I think they can put together a lot of regular season wins. I'm just not convinced with Ball coming back late. And I think by and large, the top of the East getting better. Those top five, what we've talked about, are just really good. You can argue that the Heat maybe took half a step back without PJ Tucker, but the Heat are going to play hard every night. They're going to be a good regular season team. They're going to get the most out of their talent. We'll get to Caleb Martin and all that. I don't think they take some huge step back during the regular season. I just don't think Chicago is like everything's just not going to go right for 82 games, right? And
okay, so if we have the top five we mentioned, we have Toronto 6, we have Cleveland 7, maybe Chicago 8, I guess we're now.
Yeah.
There's another team we didn't mention also, except I just want to show people how deep the East is. I know they flamed out in the first round of the playoffs last season. John Collins was injured, but you know how a backcourt of DeJounte Murray and Trae Young, who's as dynamic as any player in the NBA, he's probably going to stay now because there hasn't been much chatter. You have John Collins out there who is a stats getter, rebounds and points. You have a Clint Capella who does what that team needs. He blocks shots, he rebounds, and stays the hell out of the way on the offense. So when you look at that team, and if DeAndre Hunter ever makes that next half step to where he could be, you have an Atlanta Hawks team that's, I think you'd agree, pretty good, right?
Oh, yeah. I think DeJounte Murray is one of the underrated, I don't know, maybe not underrated, but like one of the better offseason fits and signings, because what do they need in the backcourt? Defense. He is long. He's just disruptive. And that's a team for years. The second Trae Young sat, even last year when they've tried everything, the second he sits, their offense just went in the tank. DeJounte Murray is an all-star. Right? You know, he is not an elite guy, but if you stagger their minutes a little, like now your second unit isn't terrible, right? Like you're just going to. Right. I actually might have them in front of the Bulls. I think that they're kind of on the same tier, maybe, but like when you start putting them that way. But I think that those teams are in the play-in mix, and you're right. That's a good team. You get them in the playoff. You get them in the first round. That's not some easy out. Not when John Collins is there. And I'm with you. Clint Capella is. Talk about a guy who's made a nice living, staying in his lane, learning what to do, and just being athletic. And I think he's a solid center.
So here's the next point I want to get to, and I referenced this at the close of our first segment. So for everything the Knicks thought they were going to be, for the $106 million spent on Jalen Brunson, whether they tampered or not, we'll find out sometime in December or January when the NBA makes their ruling there. It looks to me, and again, only 5 teams don't even make the play-in. So there's basically 2/3 of each conference gets some sort of, quote, postseason game anyway. When you look at the East, I think you'd agree. We spoke about Indiana in the first segment, clearly playing for lottery balls, playing for the future. Orlando, nice, young, talent base, but still 2-3 years away. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Detroit, wonderful talent base. They might have visions of playoffs this year, but they're a team for the future. I think you'd agree for that now. Detroit doesn't have to make the playoffs to justify who they are, correct?
Correct. And they got a shot at the play-in if things kind of go their way, but I think that's as good as it gets.
Okay, so to me, there are 3 teams then that are basically playing for the last playoff spot. That's Washington that brought back Bradley Beal. I don't know what Bradley Beal is thinking there's something there, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Their rookie from a couple of years ago was playing for Israel in Eurobasket, playing very well. Maybe there's something more there. Maybe Rui Hachimura missed half the season with personal issues, so maybe he comes back. But I'm basically looking at Washington, Charlotte, don't know what's going to happen with Miles Bridges there, and New York playing for the number 10 seed. For the last play-in berth, based on all the other teams we mentioned, we had our top 6. We had Cleveland maybe 7, Atlanta maybe 8, Chicago maybe 9. All good teams. All teams capable of easily having winning records. What the hell are the Knicks going to do? And are the Knicks even, when I put them against Charlotte, a team on the come, when they put them against Washington, a team desperate for any type of postseason game, so the whole Bradley Beal saga doesn't start all over again? Where did this Mitchell thing leave the Knicks?
Here's what I would say. I think you can make an argument that being patient and not overpaying is a step in the right direction as an organization for a franchise that, hey, oh my God, we got to get a star. We can't rebuild. We're New York. Let's overpay all our picks and young players for it. Like, in that sense, it's a step in the right direction. But And the advantage New York has is the same one we've talked about that Miami and Los Angeles and a couple of places has, which is you can go after the next guy, right? Like, people do want to come there. That said, this was a guy who wanted to come back home and play there. And really, yeah, you get an undersized backcourt and you've got to deal with it. They're not in a, I don't know that, look, they're not as good as Cleveland if they get him. Right now, Cleveland, I think, is in a better will be a better team than the Knicks would have been if they got him. Again, you don't get that many opportunities, even if you're New York. And I think they are really going to regret not landing him at some point. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the next guy that comes along goes to New York and fits in. But by the way, you think I don't get attacked? I put together soon after the trade went down for Mitchell, I listed out a top 10 in the East,
right,
and said who gets bounced in the play-in and is really disappointed. And I did not put Washington on there because I just kind of had them ranked 11th in my mind. Washington fans let me know about it and would like you to know, Ira, that Kristaps Porzingis is going to have a breakout year, and you are really underselling it.
As New York once said, as Dallas once said, and maybe you're right. And they got him for pennies on the dollar in that trade. Yeah. So maybe there is something more there. So I can get that, and I can understand that. My point being this: in the first segment, you can catch it on our podcast. I mentioned how I thought the pool of picks that had to be offered for Donovan Mitchell was absurd from a Heat standpoint. Kurt Helin from Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com told me, no, Cleveland was different. They're not going to get free agents. They have to trade for someone. They're not going to lure someone. I said, that's fine also. And also, they're not going to have great draft choices because they're trying to be good, unlike tankathon teams who are trying to win. That said, the Knicks had this whole pool of draft choices where it might have literally taken one more thing. Did the Knicks blow it by not putting in one more thing?
Yes, I think they overplayed their hand. I don't think they thought Cleveland was serious. I think they created the artificial deadline last Monday to say, hey, and we talked about the RJ Barrett signing at the time, but I think they created an artificial deadline with the theory that, hey, once we do that, they still don't have anywhere else to go. I will ask you this, though, Ira, really quick. If you're Utah in this situation, would you rather have 3 unprotected Cleveland Cavalier picks and a couple swaps, or a couple of swaps and 2 unprotected Knicks picks?
No, I agree. I'd rather have the unprotected picks from the buffoons who could drop to the bottom of the earth, and that's who the Knicks are, because they'll have a new coach, they'll have a new general manager, everything will change by then. Cleveland has stability at coach, it looks like. They have stability and unbelievable young talent. But Kurt, I know you addressed this also in your many pieces there at Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com. The Jazz are sort of betting that Donovan Mitchell doesn't stay. Mm-hmm. In other words, the prime picks there are 27 and 29. Donovan Mitchell has 3 years left. So in 25, he can become a free agent. Their thoughts is Donovan Mitchell leaves, they go back to the bottom. So if you are Utah, if you are Cleveland, if you are Kurt Helin, basketball savant, What would you put? Give me a percentage. Percentage that Donovan Mitchell, after these 3 remaining years on his contract, stays with the Cavaliers.
That is a really tough one. I'm going to go just above half, like say 55%.
Okay.
Like
So that's,
and I think that Utah has the advantage of knowing him better. He was very good in the community. You have talked to him. Is there a nicer like superstar?
no. He was down here for the Miami Pro Summer League. He didn't play up the fact that he's playing with Bam, and he didn't taunt Heat fans. He just loves the way he's playing and sort of who he is. Real quick, and again, I love the fact that we're podcasted here. We can go long in certain segments. The end of the last segment I mentioned to you, I want to sort of wrap up this Utah Jazz trade. We now know that Clarkson, Conley, and Bogdanovich have far less value to the Utah Jazz than they might to another team. Of those players, give me one of those 3, if you're the Miami Heat, that you might be willing to throw in some sort of protected pick, Duncan Robinson's contract. Of those 3, who do you sort of might appeal if you're window shopping now in Salt Lake City and you're the Heat?
I want Bogdanovich. It's harder to make work because he's 19 million and Clarkson's 13. And look, Clarkson will be the first one traded, I think. There's already buzz about him, but he makes less. And his role is obvious, man. Like, you know what Jordan Clarkson is. You're going to plug him in as your 6th man and watch him be a volume scorer. And there's value in that. Don't get me wrong. But you know what he is. Bogdanovich can play on both ends, can hit threes, can do a little shot creation. He is a good all-around player who you bring into Miami and gets in. If you have to send out Duncan for him, you get a more rounded player.
I agree. And if I'm sending out Duncan Robinson, a protected 1st-round pick, and hey, if you want to take your chance on a pick swap, I'm the Heat. You're the Jazz. You suck. I'll go ahead and do that also. Exactly. So, yeah, I think that's a good name. And if he's the Heat's opening night power forward, and we will get to that, by the way. Sidala, Jesse have questions about the Heat power forward situation on our chat board. We'll address that after. And what I want to come back with on our redrecover.com Inside the Paint show, and our final segment coming up is this. If every player was a free agent, all were outside free agents. And if you were the Miami Heat and you had to pick and choose and keep the salary cap in mind, and your haul was Dwayne Dedmon, Caleb Martin, and Victor Oladipo, where would that rank in the Eastern Conference among players signed during free agency this summer? So after the break on redrecover.com Inside the Paint with Kurt Helin, we'll go there and say, was the Heat offseason that awful? And then we'll go to the questions from C. Dalla and Jesse and have them tell you that, yes, it was. We'll be right back. Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, Kurt Helin from Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com, back here in your redrecover.com Inside the Paint show. Again, you can reach us on the chat board. Going to go to a couple of those. Also, if we get a chance, I think before next week's show, if you can go to the chat board, you can let Big O know, does Kurt's dog have to make an actual physical appearance on the show? We've heard him in the background. I think people need to see what the Helin dog looks like. So, folks, if you get a chance, go to the chat board. We'll take a poll. Big O will give us the results next week. Maybe we'll have a threesome next week. So we'll get to that, Kurt. Want to go to the board real quick. C. Dahl asked a question. Since the Heat haven't addressed the power forward situation, their backcourt is going to have to ball out. Kurt, I think we see this on a lot of teams. You play to your strengths. So we spoke about it with Cleveland. They don't have a small forward, but they have a great backcourt. I would agree. You can't count on power forward for this team, but how many teams in a wing rotation can give you Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, Tyler Hero, and Victor Oladipo? So would it be safe to say that you think we'll probably see a little more small ball this season from the Miami Heat?
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say the 4 in the NBA is almost a big 3 now, right? Like it's unless you've got somebody who can really, I mean, there are a handful of true 4s who can space the floor and do a lot of things, but by and large, I think what you're moving towards as a league, Ira, don't you agree, is, hey, man, if I could get 5 guys who are 6'7", and everybody switches everything, and everybody, I will take it. Yeah. And that's where, yeah, there's a handful of guys, Bam Adebayo's defensive versatility and ability to lock up a Joel Embiid, it becomes, or as much as anyone's going to, like, that's huge, right? Because it lets you stay smaller at the 4. I think they're going to have to do that, but I think that absolutely can work with the athletes and the system and the shooting that they have. It works great if you got guys who will cut and move off the ball, and you've got guys who will share, and you've got guys who can knock down the shot.
No, and I agree. Jesse M has here, why is Riley so comfortable with short bigs? Martin is not built like Tucker. Well, actually, Tucker's like 6'5", but he just,
Yeah.
he's
He
he's
plays
basically
big.
a rectangle. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
sort of like built like SpongeBob. So it's a little bit different. But you know what? When you start PJ Tucker, you're playing with an unusual power forward type situation anyway. The Heat, I almost can't recall the last time the Heat had a true power forward, maybe since Chris Bosh. And I guess you could say when they started Bam with Myers, Leonard, and then Kelly Olynyk, and those two guys were centers. Maybe Bam was the truest thing to a power forward they've had. But it just, that's not been this team's way, and the way they played in Eric Spoelstra's positionless. Kurt, like as much as you mentioned the 6'7" switch everything, Toronto has that now. The Heat certainly with Martin and Adebayo and Butler get close to that. Aren't we almost at an NBA right now where you're putting your 5 best players on the court?
Yes, very much so. And by the way, when this comes up, Ira, every year is awards voting, right? Like, my God, it's been a little different with the, oh my God, I have to pick a center lately because there have been legitimately good centers in the NBA.
Yes.
But it's really, what's the difference between a shooting guard and a small forward, or even a small forward and a big forward in the NBA? Like, it's impossible to define that the same way that it was 20 years ago when, hey, Karl Malone is a power forward and John Stockton is a point guard. And like everybody you try to fit these roles. It is just not that way.
Right. That's anymore. Welcome to the 90s. Even Atlanta now, instead of worrying about is DeJounte Murray or Trae Young the point guard, they said, hey, we have 2 really good guards. We'll make it work from there.
Yeah.
Toronto, the same thing with all their 6'7s, whatever you want to call them. We have a vote here from a guy named Orlando Alzugaray who says, show the dog. So we may have to get into that a little bit next week also.
That's going to be a next week thing.
Okay. Omar says here he thinks the last Heat true power forward was P.J. Brown. You almost can say that only because Chris Bosh really was a power forward and a center. By the end, was shooting 3-pointers, was like these hybrids. Again, I read everything on the chat board because I think that's fair. So Chris chimes in. How about we sign Carmelo Anthony real quick? Kurt, your thoughts. You saw him out in L.A., Carmelo Anthony at his age, I believe he's 47 now. Carmelo Anthony at his age, can he still offer something? What do you think happens to him this season? Remember, only 2 years ago, he couldn't find a job.
Yeah, I believe he entered the NBA during the Taft administration. He's been around a while. You know what happened, Ira? And not a lot of stars do this. He accepted a role. When he got to Portland and Damian Lillard got through to him as one of the great leaders in the game, through to him and said, man, you're not that guy anymore. Like, and he accepted a role. In that role, coming again, it's sort of an innings eater, can give you 13 points a night, can knock down threes, is loved in the locker room, off the bench. I think he would fit with Miami. I think Heat fans are going to be pretty frustrated. I'm not reporting anything new here.
Right.
There's been a lot of buzz about him with Danilo Gallinari now out for the season in Boston with the ACL, which is a blow to them. That hurts their depth. There's a lot of talk about them using Carmelo, and there's been talks there about him going there. That might frustrate some Heat fans. I think, look, Carmelo is one of those guys because he's accepted a role. You can, if you're just asking him to come off the bench and play 20 a night, he can play for 30 teams. Like he can do.
And you know what? And he's like Danilo Gallinari to a degree also. He's a regular season player. He'll buy you minutes.
Absolutely.
He'll help Al Horford stay off the court a little. And he's probably not going to sniff the court when you get to that Boston with their talent, their 8 or 9 man playoff rotation. Yeah. So I'm fine with that also. Here's one I've been getting a bunch at AskIra@SunSentinel.com, and I don't know where it's come from, but you're based on the West Coast, closer to the Sacramento Kings than I am. People are asking what it's going to take for the Heat to get Domantas Sabonis. Curtis, is he in any way available based on the fact they gave up Halliburton less than a year ago?
Absolutely not available. I mean, everybody thinks the Kings are going to break this thing up again. I don't. That is not happening. That is a team genuinely desperate to make the playoffs and more likely to look. They think with Fox, with De'Aaron Fox making a step back and Domantas Sabonis. And by the way, they got a bunch of solid veteran role players around there. They are talking not just playing. They really want to make the postseason. Look, I don't know that happens. Both conferences are pretty deep with their top 8. But that said, they're way more there. Even if they have a slow start to the season, they are more likely to try and add than subtract there.
No, I'd agree also. Matter of fact, Terry makes a good point here. We left out a name of Cleveland because I thought it's a player whose best days were and maybe not anymore. But he said, hey, are you guys sleeping on Karis LeVert in Cleveland? And the fact that he can be a dynamic scorer, he is probably closer to a true small forward than they have there. My thought is they have their offense with Mitchell and they have their offense with Garland, who was so ball dominant in their playing round last year, that I think they need almost an Okoro type defender more than they need a LeVert type small forward. But I guess Karis LeVert is another name we probably should include when we talk about an upgraded young Cleveland core.
Yeah, he didn't really fit as well next there. I mean, there was some injury stuff. It didn't blend that well last year, like you said. And now he becomes, frankly, with Mitchell and Garland, he's option number 3 at best. And frankly, between just you and I, Mobley has to move up that option list really fast.
Oh, absolutely.
If we're talking about them contending in a few years, it's because Evan Mobley is a top 10 player in the NBA.
And is an all NBA type player because he showed that he has the ability to get there. I agree with that totally. People still trying to sell us on Carmelo. Not going to happen with the Heat, sorry. Jesse says to us also, what about UD getting 10 minutes of power forward? Look, that ship sailed 8 years ago, 6 years ago, let's say. UD here is for inspiration and leadership. I just don't see it. They will play Yurtsevin. They will play Dedmon. They will play Caleb Martin. They will play Max Strus. They will play Jimmy Butler at power forward, I think, before you see UD. Now, if Bam Adebayo goes out or Omar Yurtsevin doesn't develop, maybe that opens. But that would really be, I think we'd both agree, Udonis Haslem at this point in his career is open in case of emergency. I think you'd agree with that, Kurt?
Absolutely. Look, if he's getting 10 minutes a night, we're going to be talking about a lot of other problems in Miami.
All right. I know you don't have a pen and paper there, so I won't make you do a worksheet, but this is the point that I wanted to get to. I'm going to probably write about it in my Sunday column here at the Sun Sentinel. If everyone was a free agent this summer, and so you could go out based on your means and sign the players you have, I try to make this argument that the Heat had 4, you can make it 5 if you want, I'm not counting Markieff Morris, primary free agents. Of that group, the Miami Heat signed Victor Oladipo, Caleb Martin, and Dwayne Dedmon. Where would you rank that haul as far as signing compared to Boston's prime haul, now that Gallinari is out, of Malcolm Brogdon? Philadelphia's prime haul of PJ Tucker and Montrell Harrell. Milwaukee's prime haul, maybe I'm missing a player, but I have Joe Ingles as their primary addition. If he comes back from his Achilles in a situation like that. The Nets prime haul, Royce O'Neal, I guess, is their top free agent from the pool. The point I'm trying to make is when you look at what the Heat had in Oladipo, who's going to be a prime rotation player, in Caleb Martin, who might start, and there is a role in the NBA for backup center, which Dwayne Dedmon is. Did the Heat necessarily fail as much as people think, or is it all about Kurt Helin, the shiny new object, and that people always want something new and something different?
I think there is something to the shiny new object. And by the way, those are bigger. Malcolm Brogdon's a bigger name, right? PJ Tucker is the biggest name of that group, and he left. And you can say Caleb Martin isn't as sexy a big name because a lot of fans don't, we've seen PJ Tucker play big minutes in big games for a lot of teams. So I don't think it's as bad as people want to say. I don't look at their offseason and think they also took some big step forward. They are betting, and you've talked about this a lot. They've bet big on Oladipo, haven't they?
Yeah, I think Victor Oladipo is the key to, honestly, everything this season. That's stupid. Is the key to something different this season, is the way I would put it. He was barely back last year. He's showing these, and we spoke about this, and you can catch it in our podcast, one of the previous segments here on redrecover.com, Inside the Paint. Everyone looks great in the offseason. If Victor Oladipo looks like Victor Oladipo's social media, if Kyle Lowry looks like Kyle Lowry's social media, if Tyler Hero looks like Tyler Hero's social media, then I would say the Heat gained about 120 pounds in muscle mass this season while dropping about body fat to like 0.2% based on how all these guys look, because that's what it's all about in the NBA and offseason. I do have a quick one for you, Kirk, because I asked my wife this, and I'm curious, maybe Big O on the other side will chime in this also. we see all these Instagram, TikTok, and other video posts from players working out, okay? A lot of them say it's a solitary workout. I'm on my own in the gym. Who the hell is taking these videos? And number two, do you find it in any way narcissistic that every time an NBA player works out in the offseason, there has to be a cameraman there?
Man, welcome to branding. This is more about marketing and I don't look. You don't get to be an NBA player without putting in work on your craft, man. There are too many. You don't get to be one of the 450 best players. There are thousands more. Your height, well, unless you're Joel Embiid, your size and your athleticism, outside of the handful of Giannis freaks. Like if you're Caleb Martin, there are a whole lot of guys as big and as athletic as you, and you have to outwork them to a degree. And they want to show that is part of the brand now. And so I think that's part of it. I think it's more image and perception. You could, man, if a tree falls in the forest, man, if you work out in a gym by yourself and don't put up the video, did it happen?
Big O? Got to put your mic on, Big O. Sean, turn on the damn mic for Big O. He owns the show.
That's me, not Sean. Sean does his job. I don't. I would actually say that you're right, that a lot of people are trying to promote themselves, but I think a lot of these players are also trying to help their trainers too. Because they have trainers in the off season and they're kind of helping sell those guys. Yes. So sometimes it's really powered by the trainer and the guys are doing the trainer a favor to try to get him more business. So it's kind of a catch-22. Yeah, it's a me thing, but there's also a little business involved from what I understand.
Chris Berkeley may be the
Big
best
O,
of that.
don't go away for a second. Big O, stay for a second. You know this, Big O, from down here. The Marlins do bark in the park a couple of times a year. People bring their dogs to the stadium. So I need you. I don't have a pet, but Kurt does. I know you do. When are we going to have Dog Day on the Big O Show? I think we need to set that up, give Kurt a date. Now, it might get incredibly unruly, and I might wind up going solo that day, but I think we need to have bark in the Big O Park sometime coming up soon.
I think that makes a lot of sense. All the hosts that come on, maybe it should be Dog Week, because that way throughout the week, any host that has a dog, like I know Marcel has a dog, we have 5. So we could like show a dog every different segment. You know what I mean? So we're loaded here. You know, that's why we just got artificial turf, thanks to Cutter's Edge, for our dogs. So
and now and I want to get you a dog sponsor. So you know what? Get a dog sponsor. We'll have Dog Week. You'll set it up. You let Kurt know. We can have all of our listeners on our chat board post videos or pictures of their dogs. We're going to make you some money here because, again, you told Kurt and I, you guys got to earn. It's like, it's like he's the OG. Yeah. He tells us you got to earn. So we're going to earn for you. So, folks, keep an eye out on Big O, on his chat board, on his show, on his segments. We will let you know when Dog Week is coming. We will see the Kurt Helin dog, what it looks like. And we'll see if there's enough room with that huge cabeza of Big O to also fit his 5 dogs on the screen. So that'll be coming down the road. And you know what? This is the perfect segment. We've hit the top of the hour. So we literally, for the first time, can hand it over. So, folks, that was this week's RedRecover.com Inside the Paint Show. Kurt and I will be back 9 o'clock Eastern for me, 6 a.m. Sorry, Kurt. Pacific for Kurt next Wednesday, when we'll only be less than 2 weeks away from the start of training camp. So we'll have all kind of news for you. And maybe some poodles, puppies, and pooches also. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to the RedRecover.com.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.